Thank you everybody for joining us tonight for the Best Shalom Men's Club event. We have a very interesting presentation tonight being given by Judy and Michael Stevens. Before I turn the Zoom session over to Michael and Judy, I'd like to provide some information, some background. I'm sure a lot of people know them, but there's some interesting information that I wanted to share. Judy is a child of a Holocaust survivors. She was born and lived her early life in Hungary. Judy grew up hearing stories about her mother's experience in concentration camps and her father's time performing forced labor in Siberia. Judy and her parents left Hungary in 1956 to escape the communist takeover of the country. During a new wave of anti-Semitism, her family sought a new life in Montreal, Canada. When Judy's father passed in 1997, she realized that her parents' stories had to be heard by as many people as possible. She has developed and will share with us this evening an exceptional presentation that documents her mother's strong will to survive, even as she protected and took care of her younger sister, and I'm going to mess this up because I don't know all the names, Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Judy, can you help me with that other one? Theresienstadt?
Okay, Theresienstadt.
Okay, thank you all. Judy is a retired teacher. She taught elementary school and adult education, including ESL and GED classes for over 40 years. Michael was born and grew up in New York City in Long Island, where his family was actively involved in Jewish culture, educational, and religious life. He's a graduate of Haverford College in Pennsylvania and received his MA in music composition from Hunter College of the city of New York. Mike has taught elementary school music in Brentwood, New York for a couple of years and served for 3 years on the faculty of the Armed Forces School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia. Mike was ordained as a rabbi at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in New York in 1976, excuse me, and served congregations in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Montreal before beginning his 30 years as rabbi of Temple Bethel in Munster, Indiana in 1987. Judy and Mike joined Beth Shalom after moving to Holly Springs 3 years ago. Judy is running the Beth Shalom Sisterhood gift shop for the past 2 years. She's also served as a volunteer English and assistant language teacher at the Oakview Elementary School in Holly Springs and the countrywide summer read and feed program. Mike continues to write liturgical music and has composed a number of marches and other works for concert band and orchestra. Before the pandemic, Mike played piano at our Shabbat services and served as accompanist for the Oakview Elementary School chorus in Holly Springs. That's a bit of their background. I'm sure there's much more, and I would like to now turn this evening's presentation over to Judy and Michael. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. I'd like to welcome all of you. We appreciate you all being here. I'll start with a couple of thank yous on Judy's behalf, and my be third. First, thank you to our Men's Club presidents, Andy and John, for inviting us to do our presentation tonight. Thank you, John, for your kind words of introduction. Thank you, Shana, for all your good work with our flyers and emails. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Rabbi Edery, for inviting us to the program and serving as a co-host this evening. Thank you to my son, Aaron, and Judy's daughter, Andrea, and our friend, Julie in Indiana, for helping us with the program and all kinds of tech support. We'd like to welcome our friends, Julie and Marcia from Indiana. We'd like to welcome our friends, Marilyn and Barry from beautiful downtown Montreal.
Well, not quite Montreal.
Or the western suburbs.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us. And so we're going to get started now. We appreciate all of you being here. Thanks to all of you. We're going to put this on screen share, and Judy will begin with some words of introduction. Actually, we'll do the words of introduction first, and then we'll go to screen share.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. And we all have different memories of our childhood. None of us have the same story. My memories of my childhood consist of the stories my parents told about their childhood, their families, life before the war, but mainly about their experiences during the war. Their stories stayed with them until the very end of their lives. The effects of the war left deep scars, pain, and sadness. On our coffee table sat a book called The Hungarian Holocaust. And as a young child, I would look at the pictures and see the horrors that my family experienced. My parents and their friends would get together at any social gathering, and one of the main topics was each person's war experiences. What I will share here is the story I learned from my parents, from tapes that were recorded during the interview with the Holocaust, the Shoah Foundation. And also I gave my mom a tape recorder and had her record her stories so she could remember her family and her background, and then I wrote them out. So when you will listen, excuse me, I looked up many information, background knowledge about the war and what happened. So Mike will handle this part of the story, and I will tell my mother and father's side of the story. When you listen to the videos, my mom will use her Hungarian accent, and if needed, I will be able to translate. So this is the story of my mom, Klara Mermelstein, and this is her picture when she was 24, just before the war. And we give credit to the Holocaust Speakers Bureau and also for the Center for Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Educations of North Carolina. So thank you. So first then I will introduce my family. This is my mother and her brother Laci. The one on your right is my mother. She was 12 years old there. And the one next to her is her brother. Now you don't have to wonder anymore where I got my curly hair. Certainly not from my mom. Okay, so this is my, on the left-hand side is my father, my grandfather and grandmother. The two gentlemen in the middle were my two uncles, or my mom's three brothers. And on the right is Eva, one of the survivors of the Holocaust. Out of the family of 6, only 3 survived the Holocaust. So on I'm sorry, next picture. So on Friday nights, the family would get together and light Shabbat candles. Klara, or my grandfather, went to shul, as my mother would say. And when he came home, the children all lined up and they were blessed by their father individually. And then they had Shabbat dinner together. The war really affected my mother's belief. She was angry with God, who she felt did not help them. She still lit candles and occasionally went to a Hungarian synagogue, but we were no longer Orthodox. Okay, there we go.
You can see here the map of Hungary and Central Europe. Judy's family, her parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were all born in Hungary. They lived in a town called Gyöngyös, about 50 miles east of the capital city of Budapest. I'll tell you a little bit about Gyöngyös. The Jewish population in 1941 was approximately 2,400. After the war in 1946, there were only 300 Jews left in Gyöngyös. Most were deported in 1944 and sent to concentration camps, where most of these innocent men, women, and children were murdered by the Nazis as part of their plan to have what they considered a racially pure population. Jews were considered inferior. And we see here 3 photos of Gyöngyös before the war. On the left is the town's main street, one of its major buildings. The photo in the middle is the town's largest Catholic church. You may be able to see a small cross on top. The photo on the right is of Judy's family's business. They exported fruits and vegetables. In the picture, you can see some of Judy's family and their workers. They bought fruits and vegetables from the farmers and hired workers to pick the grapes and other fruits and vegetables. The business had to close in 1944 because Jews were no longer allowed to export or import goods or really conduct any business for that matter.
What I always get a great satisfaction is that I see my grandmother there, and she's wearing what you would call in Europe a babushka on her head. In front of her was my mother as a young girl, and next to her was her older brother Bandi. So to me, it's very exciting to see that. In the next video, we're going to tell you about how my mother felt about being a Jew in Hungary.
Long. My grandfather was born, my great-grandfather was born in Hungary. Half of my mother's side, it was Hungarian. So I was born in Hungary. It's my father's side too.
So did you feel very patriotic?
Yeah, in that time we feel nothing can happen with us. We was born here, we was Hungarians, we paid our taxes, we thought we knew that the Polish and the Czechoslovakians, it was deported. They said nothing can happen with us in Hungary.
And what's interesting here, and sort of keep looking for one of the themes of the story, is the denial that nothing is going to happen to us, we'll be okay, but nothing will happen to us. And that was a helpful way of, I suppose, surviving.
So in April 1944, the Germans moved into Hungary about a year before the end of the war. Once they occupied Hungary, a series of prohibitions started, including directives requiring Jews to publicly wear a yellow Star of David on their clothes. The word Jude means Jew in German. The Nazis used this badge not only to stigmatize and humiliate Jews, but also to segregate them and to watch and control their movements. The badge also facilitated deportation. In the spring of 1944, the Jews of Gyöngyös were subjected to a reign of terror with the willing participation of the Hungarian fascists. The laws forbade intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews and excluded Jews from full participation in various professions. The laws also barred employment of Jews in the civil service and totally restricted their opportunities in economic life. We see here the roundup of Jews in Hungary. In late May of 1944, the Jews of Gyöngyös and the surrounding areas were rounded up and forcibly moved to a ghetto in the city of Hatvan, Hungary.
This is a postcard from my mother's brother Bandi, who was taken away to a concentration camp before my family went to the ghetto of Hatvan. In it, he writes, "I miss you and the family. I wanted to let you know I'm okay. I heard that the family moved to Hatvan." You hear the upbeatness of the card, but I think they were forced to write good things because they didn't want other people to try to guess what was going on in the concentration camps. Okay.
Here we see the forced march to the ghetto in Hatvan. Only older men, women, and children were taken to the ghetto. Younger men were taken to labor camps. They were allowed to bring only one bundle of personal items each. All their belongings, all their clothing, everything had to be carried with them. They soon would be stripped of all these belongings, but at this point, they did not know what lay ahead of them. Here we see building the ghetto walls and the entrance on the right to the Hatvan ghetto. The sign over the ghetto on the right in Hungarian indicates this was a sugar factory.
Life in the ghetto, in my mother's words, was very difficult. She said 11 people were given one room, one bathroom, and one kitchen. We did not work there. We just sat. Every day the police came and took something away from us. One time all the dresses, then all the suits were taken away. Eventually we had nothing left. When we had nothing else left, we were taken by train and deported to Auschwitz. My mom's gonna tell her experience, just pretty much using similar words. There's one word she will use, which is the word latrine. And I believe, I try to look it up in the translations, but I believe it means, in a crude word, toilet, or if you want it in a nicer word, bathroom. So here's my mom's words.
Want of dress, suits or coats or whatever, and slowly they took away everything. They came to, every few days they came, now you have to give them up this, now you have to give up that. So finally we didn't have anything. And last day before we left, they said, because they knew we tried to hide something here, we tried to hide something there, they said, no, it's this over, all the searching, whatever you have left, bring it to the office and put it down. And my boss, he was a very, very clever man, this lawyer. And I told him, listen, why we have to do this? Why don't you shoot in the latrine or something? And he said, you are too young. We can buy our peace for this. And the next day we was in the wagon to deported.
What I'd like you to hear there is, again, the denial. If we do this, then maybe nothing will happen. We can maybe buy our freedom. Maybe we can give something and nothing bad is going to happen. Okay, so here, sorry, I was one. Okay.
We see people here on the train cars. We can't even imagine what it would have been like with several dozen people or more in one cattle car without any room to sit or stand under the most unbelievable, horrible conditions.
So again, my mother will explain life, or at least her time on the train going to Auschwitz.
Another train, and they took us to Auschwitz.
How long was that trip?
I think about 3 or 4 days.
Tell me what was like on the trip.
Horrible. It was old and young people, about 100 in one car, and we're sitting on the floor. And a few times you get some water and some bread and some tomato soup. And all people everybody get tired, everybody get nervous, everybody was fed up. And finally we get there.
So again, I'm wondering how much they knew at this time where they were going, because what they were really told is they're going to be resettled somewhere. And that word resettled, and if you work, will come up again in her story. This was the horrible train, about 100 people in a cattle car. You can see that there are no seats, there are no bathrooms, and there are no windows. And as my mother said, they got some water, some bread, some soup, but that's about it for 4 days.
Here we see the arrival at the Auschwitz concentration camp. I'm sure you've all seen the sign. The sign reads in German, Arbeit macht frei, work makes free, work will set you free. The sign was used by the Nazis to mislead the people so they would not panic and would believe that if they worked hard in the concentration camp, they would be freed. But there was no escape. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire, and anyone who dared try to escape would be killed.
Again, and perhaps as they're walking through or approaching the gate, that work will set us free is again perhaps a denial for them, or maybe a hope that one day they in fact will be free. And the next picture shows the actual arrival. So when the people got off the train, you can see they were lined up in 2 lines. one side for the men, one side for the women and children. In the middle, with his hand on his hip, is the infamous Dr. Mengele. And he's the one who decided the fate of the people. He would decide if you went right, which means you would get to work and stay alive, or if you went left, you would be going to the showers and will not live. And my mother had the bad opportunity to meet Dr. Mengele several times. And also Dr. Mengele was the one who did experimentations on women, on twins. And my mother tried to protect my Aunt Eva from this horrible man. Okay, so now I will give you a little presentation of my mom's words describing her landing in Auschwitz.
We arrived in early hours, and then they took us from the train, and right away they separated the men's and the women's. And they came, the Jewish men who helped us. They said, if somebody is a twin, don't mention it. And then we had to stay in twin line. And it was four of us, four friends. And I saw one of us standing with her mother. And she went on this side, the right side. The next one, the next two, she wear glasses, and Mengele didn't like the glasses. They sent them to the other side. And I was, one of my friends had an 80 years old grandmother. And because we had two, I take her and my sister and my mother stand on the back of us. And then I saw that every two of them was the same way, different way, but together. I took as my arm, it was the three officer. I didn't know it's Mengele because we didn't know anything. And they stepped back and I told them, this is my mother and this is my sister. Then the next minute, we just was pushed, my sister and me was pushed in this way and mother was pushed to the left side. And we just turned to each other and I never forgot her face when he looked at us, when he went to the left side. She just looked what's happened with us. And that was the last time when we saw her.
So this is the first experience of separation of families and my mom seeing her mother for the last time and the look on her mother's face. She also saw her father and her brothers going to the man's line, and she was able to see them for the last time as they went. And we're not sure how long they survived after that. The interviewer asked my mother, was it better for you to have your sister there? Did that help you? And my mother said, I had to help her because she was only 14 years old and she was completely lost. She lost her mother and she was a tiny little girl, but she gave me energy because I had to help her. I tried to get any tiny little food, a job, so I could get extra food to keep us alive. So in a way, she helped me a lot. She also mentioned that she was asked if you're having friends with you help, and she said they gave me tremendous courage and love and support.
To work. So I had these two girlfriends and me and my sister, and we were selected. But then they took us to the bath and they were selected again, and then it's Mengele was there. And right away he wanted to take my sister away. And I knew the story, so we called each other and we yelled like too crazy. And God gave us so much strength. Two people tried to separate us, and we had the strength to hold together. Then Mengele got tired of me, and he kicked me in my back, these beautiful black boots. I had these boots on my back for weeks. And then we went back to the barrack again. And we
So this was one of the first time that my mother was hit, and Dr. Mendele's shoes really caused her a lot of pain. Then we wonder whether she had any other abuse at the camp. So in her own words,
Any of them ever abuse you physically?
yeah, sometimes they kick us and they pushed us. Yeah, if you didn't go fast enough, if you didn't give something fast enough, of course.
What time?
so one of the stories that this reminds me of is my mom said before she went to the trip, she took a picture of my father, who was then her fiance, and took the picture and put it inside her shoes so she could look at him. And it was found by one of the workers, and she took it out and slapped my mom for hiding it. And she says this is the first time she ever got slapped in her whole life.
We can see Klara's tattoo from Auschwitz here. It was only Jews in Auschwitz and Birkenau who received the tattoo, who was not in the other camps. Once the Jews were unloaded and separated into male and female lines, they were then subjected to a selection process. Usually those 14 years of age and older were deemed fit for work and sent to one side, the rest to the other side. Elderly Jews and women with children were sent directly to the line of prisoners who were condemned to death in the gas chambers. Those Jews selected for work were sent to a separate building for registration. Prisoners would be registered before undressing, placing their clothes on a hook together with their shoes. They would then be tattooed with a registration number. Shaved full body hair, disinfected and forced through showers that were either extremely cold or painfully hot.
The number you see on my mother's arm is A21154. A stands for Arbeiter, means worker. So they were called workers. It means that my Aunt Eva, who came after her, had the number A21155. And you will see her tattoo on her arm at the end of the story. So in my mother's words, the barrack had no windows, but instead had a row of skylights at the top of the roof. Each block had wooden three-tiered bunks. Prisoners slept under the thin blankets or rags or on their straw mattresses. There were about 1,000 people in one barrack. She said that they got one bunk bed to sleep on between her 4 sisters and my Aunt Eva. And that meant that they were able to give each other support, warmth, and encouragement. What was interesting, but not funny at this point, but still an interesting tidbit, is that they could not lie down on their stomach because there was no room. You couldn't lie on your back because there was no room. So you could only sleep on your side. And if one person moved, everybody had to move and switch side. And if the other, again, if they moved, they had to all move to the other side. It's a little bit of a interesting story. Sorry, I'll go on to the next one. This one is the picture of the bathrooms, and it was in another building. And the toilets, everybody had to go at the same time in the morning and at night, and no other time during the day. So my mom, again, it's not a nice story, but it is her story, that she always tried to find a place where nobody was sitting behind her because she felt embarrassed. So, okay, the next. she met her, these were the wire fences that separated the camps. And one day when she was walking, she saw one of her brothers on the other side. And her brother said, you have so little clothes on. I'm going to throw you my shirt so you can cover yourself. And also he gave her a necklace, a little silver necklace with the picture of Moses on it. And my mom unfortunately lost it, but you will hear about that part of the story later. My mom had made a promise to herself that she would never let Mengele see her sister again, that she would take her out of Auschwitz. And once she said, when they were in line, I saw Mengele. I pushed my sister through a barrack window and only I got into line. And this is how I saved her from Mengele.
Krakow. It was a very good looking German officer, a woman officer with a horse, riding the horse. He was looked so nice. He said, such a good, nice woman can be only a nice person. And later they shows us a barrack, it was painted in white. And under this barrack, it was 3,000 babies. And half of them was killed by her hand. And then next to them, it was another barrack, and we saw the little shoes.
So again, sense of denial that even in this ugly place, maybe there are some nice people, but unfortunately, that was not the case. Okay, so in the camps, there was very little food, very minimal, and the people were hungry and starved. My mom said she was very lucky. She got a job peeling potatoes, and her sister and her were able to eat the potato peels raw. I had to help my sister Avi because she was so skinny. She gave me energy because I had to help her. I tried to get whatever food I could because she needed food. Learning the terrible truth. So my mom figured out by the second day that something was not quite right here. And she smelled the burning, and she smelled the burning flesh, and she saw the chimneys. And she then knew where her mother and her father went. But she decided that even though she knew, she didn't tell anybody because they wouldn't have believed her. And also she didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings that this was the next step.
Over the past 20 years, Judy and I have gone to Budapest 6 times to visit her aunt and 2 cousins. On our second trip there in 2003, we took a trip with her aunt and her cousin to Poland. We spent 3 days in Krakow, Poland, which included 1 day visiting the camps in Auschwitz and Birkenau, where Judy's aunt had been there 60 years before. We spent the whole day there between the 2 camps, and her aunt gave us an unbelievable personalized tour. She showed us the barracks, the crematoria, all the places she remembered. Some of the buildings over the years had been turned into a museum, and we saw things that you've seen in the movies. We saw suitcases and shoes and clothes and things like that. Some of the former barracks had photos on the walls, and Judy's aunt recognized some of the children in the photos as her old childhood friends from Gyöngyös who were killed 60 years before.
So now the Allies were coming closer, the German and Americans. So they put everybody on a train, and they kept them on this train for 5 days. All the time, the Americans bombed the trains. And the Germans decided they were not staying on the trains. They got off the trains, but left the Jews on the trains. And many people died on this trip. There were fleas on the train. They didn't get any food. They were hungry. And part of the way, they made us walk. Now, notice some goodness in this tragedy. Some of the people who saw us felt sorry for us and threw us some bread. And this is one of the themes, too, of the story of the goodness of people who helped. We were so hungry when we arrived, my mother said, we wanted to eat the grass, but they didn't allow us to do so. They finally fed us, but nothing was enough.
In the summer of 1944, the Allies were closing in on the Third Reich. In early November 1944, the Nazis attempted to cover up the mass murder they had committed in Auschwitz. Thus, the men and women of Auschwitz were transported in trucks and railroad cars. Some were forced to walk many miles to keep the prisoners beyond the Allies' reach and to relocate them for labor purposes. In April 1945, the transports and death marches reached Theresienstadt, also called Theresian, in Czechoslovakia, from Auschwitz and other concentration camps. Theresienstadt served a number of purposes, but it was primarily a camp ghetto or holding pen for Jews before they were sent to the death camps. But now, toward the end of the war, the Nazis were moving people from the death camps back to Theresienstadt.
Did we talk about the when they worked in the factory? No.
No.
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna go back one. Here, my mom and her group were taken in Dresden near Theresienstadt to work in a car factory making cars for the Nazi regime. And there was a foreman who taught them how to build the cars and how to do the parts. And then he looked at them and said, "Why are you so skinny? You look hungry." And he then took 2 sandwiches each day, hid it behind the machines, and gave it to them, as well as a coffee with sugar. And then one day it was his birthday, and he shared the birthday cake with them. He told them, "If you ever come free, come back and see me." But my mother tried to find him, but they never could. And again, in these horrible times, there were the goodness of people who tried to help. Okay. I'm sorry, I think that I had to go back. Sorry, okay. Okay, cell block B. Okay.
This is cell block B, where Klara and her sister Avi stayed in Theresienstadt. In Theresienstadt, Klara got a job handing out towels to the men going to the showers. The SS guards insulted the prisoners and made women give towels to naked men just to embarrass everyone. But Klara got a little extra food as a result, and she could take the food to her sister Avi.
They also had a job, it was a slave labor, of hauling rocks in carts. So the Nazis pursued a conscious policy of annihilation through work, under which certain categories of prisoners were literally worked to death. In this policy, camp prisoners were forced to work under conditions that would directly and deliberately lead to illness, injury, and death. My mother was forced to work in a quarry, hauling heavy rocks all day. They hauled the rocks from one side of the quarry to the other side of the quarry and back again. They had little food or energy, but the rocks served of no purpose other than hurting the prisoners.
We can see here the time of liberation, May 9, 1945. Soviet troops entered the camp on May 9th. The International Red Cross took responsibility for caring for the prisoners. Around 30,000 prisoners were in the camp at the time of liberation.
So in my mom's word, she says, one night the lights went out and a sign was put on the door saying that everyone was free now and you were under the Red Cross protection. The Germans were gone and the Russians were there. The inmates all grabbed anything they could find that was red and waved to celebrate the Russian liberation. The following day, my mom got a high fever and developed typhus. And because of that, she had to stay in the camps for 3 more months before she could leave. So after the war, once my mother's typhus was cured, she and her sister traveled to Budapest, Hungary. The Hayas, or the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, greeted them and helped them find shelter, food, and clothing. They also helped them find and connect with those family members who were still alive. The nice story, again, we look for the nice in bad things. And the nice story here is that little necklace that I mentioned that my uncle gave my mother with the little picture of Moses on it. She was looking through all the things that were brought back, and there on the table, she found the little necklace. And that was a miracle. So only my mother's older brother, Polly, returned. Her parents and 2 brothers did not. So if you bear with me, I just quickly want to go over my father's side, who also did not serve, was not in the Holocaust, but he was also tortured as a prisoner of war. And here is my father sitting on top of this car with my grandmother and grandfather next to the car, her brother with his arms around a young lady, and my Aunt Sarah, who my daughter gets her as her middle name, sitting on the car. Both Sarah and my grandparents did not survive the war.
Here's the story of the labor camps in Siberia. Jewish men in Hungary were prohibited from serving in the regular armed forces in World War II because of the Hungarian anti-Jewish laws. Instead, they were subject to forced labor performed by labor battalions consisting primarily of Hungarian Jewish men, conscripted by the German allied Hungarian regime. 80% of the Jewish forced laborers never returned home, falling prey to battle, disease, Soviet captivity, and outright murder at the hands of Hungarian soldiers. The commanders of these labor battalions often treated the Jewish units with extreme cruelty, abuse, and brutality. Men who worked in mine quarries were frequently pushed to their deaths off the man-made cliffs and embankments. When the Soviet forces drew near, many of the Jews in the labor force intentionally became prisoners of war, hoping their trials and tribulations would soon end. The Soviets, however, regarded them as Hungarian soldiers, and as a result, they entered the Soviet prisoner of war system. Tragically, only about a quarter of those who became prisoners survived. Judy's father, Erno, spent 5 years in Siberia, doing forced labor and as a prisoner of war. He escaped from prison, and like those who survived, took a one-way train toward Budapest. He went most of the way as a stowaway on top of a train car to the small city of Halmin, now called Halmur, in northern Romania. From Halmur, he walked the rest of the way back to Budapest, about 250 miles, hiding from Hungarian soldiers in the snowbanks over the course of several weeks. Most of those who returned were never compensated by Hungary. The Hungarians said there were no records to document the forced labor service. Almost none of the Nazis responsible for murdering many Jewish men were convicted, or they were not sentenced to serious prison terms. The few who were caught were given light symbolic sentences.
So you can well imagine my father hated the winter. And where did we live? Montreal, which had lots and lots of winter. So every winter, God bless him, he just complained about the winter and that he has already suffered through the winters. And here is a picture of the Hungarian or prisoners of war when they were digging trenches. And this was a forced labor. Okay, so quickly, we're getting to the end, but I just wanted my father, give him a fair share and just to tell part of his story. It's kind of cut off at the end, but you hear the beginning and you've heard most of his story anyway.
Like she said, I was in the army first, and
Kicsit beszél hangosan.
then I was transferred to the Labor Command with the Hungarian army, and we was working for the Germans. We went till Stalingrad, and we was working in the first line. We made trenches there, and then in the was winter, I don't know, November or.
Okay, so you've heard most of the story and this is just part of it. Okay, so when we returned to Hungary, my mother had found some of the jewelry that my father's family hid in the ground. And my mother had the chance of speaking to my Aunt Sarah, who told her, when you get home, if we don't find the jewelry, and she told them where to find it. The other one was a card that was sent by my other uncle. So when my parents got home in 1945, they both got married. This is an after picture. And 9 months later, I was born. So, and then in 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out and the Russian tanks came through the city of Budapest. There was shooting and bombing, and my family and I, we went hiding underground. And my parents were afraid that if they stayed, there would be another Holocaust or anti-Semitism, and they felt that this is the time to leave. And we escaped, which is another big long story, which I'm not going to tell because it's not my story to tell, but we escaped to Austria, from Austria to England, and then from England to Canada. And so my family today is, to my parents, is great joy, because now we have the future generation that they got to see. And that's me on the left-hand side. My Aunt Eva, the young skinny lady, she was my favorite person in the whole world. And then her son, the young man on the left, he's an architect in Budapest. And my cousin Vera was my Uncle Paul's daughter. She's the head doctor of the Jewish hospital in Budapest. And then here, sorry. And here are their grandchildren. Now, this is only 5. That's my parents' grandchildren, but we're also blessed with 5 more on Mike's side. So in reality, we have 10 beautiful grandchildren. And here are my 2 children, David and Andrea. And this was my aunt who survived till the age of 89, and she just passed away last year. 2 years ago, excuse me. And I would like to just leave with a thought that although there's a lot of sadness, torture, and crime against humanity, one of the themes I talked about was the theme of of denial. So I won't go over that again. But there was also the love of country and loyalty, which my mother felt. And there was also the love that was expressed to so many times, the love of two sisters who were fighting for survival, the love of children for their siblings and for their parents, and the love of parents for their children. There was as well the love of friends who protected and took care of each other under these horrible conditions. And there were the love of strangers who helped the Jews, even though they could have themselves been persecuted and killed. And finally, the joy my parents felt of rebuilding their lives after the war, even after experiencing so much pain and horror. The war and the happiness of moving on and enjoying the new generation of Jews who were born after the Holocaust. And I'd like to end with the words of Elie Wiesel, who witnessed the worst atrocities in the camps that man ever leashed on fellow men. And he was a witness who believed that to acknowledge the suffering of another and to have them feel less alone was imperative for every human being. He spoke around the world, and he talked about and reminds us that there's still people being tortured and mistreated, like in Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and I'm sure you could mention hundreds of other places where we are still experiencing cruelty. And because of that, he said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. And now you witnessed it, and now you can be a witness to the Holocaust. Thank you. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay,
So now I don't know what we do.
we're going to turn off the screen share and we'll invite comments and questions. And again, thank you all for being here tonight.
Judy, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Anthea.
Oh, okay.
Okay. May I ask you, when you came to Montreal, did you ever live on Carleton?
Close to I know the street, yeah.
Because my dearest friend Elaine, her family are also Holocaust survivors. And she lived on Carleton. And she mentioned that down the street was a little girl named Judy.
I told the story.
No kidding.
Only they were in Poland. Her mother was hidden in a neighbor's barn for 2.5 years. And that's where my friend Elaine was born, on the kitchen table in the Polish farmer's house.
There were a lot of Jews. Judy was a popular name at that time.
Okay.
I wanted to introduce my ex-husband and his wife, Barry and Marilyn. You probably know where Carleton Street is. Do you, Barry?
But that wasn't you who lived on
so,
Carleton.
Yeah.
Yes, we had friends who lived on Carleton. It's about 2 blocks north of Van Horn.
Yes, I know.
Around Derby.
I grew up in Montreal also, so I know all those places. Yes.
Nice.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's right near
Okay.
Victoria.
Thank you again for sharing.
Good, thanks.
Thank
Anthony.
you. If you ever think of anything else you'd like to ask, just email us, text us, call us.
Thank you. First of all, it was wonderful, but I did leave a couple of questions in the chat, actually.
Okay.
I didn't know if you saw them.
No.
We'll take a look at them now.
Sorry.
Read this.
No, you go ahead. I can't see.
Okay, so the fact that they were denying the reality of what was happening to them, did that keep them from getting out of Hungary when they could have?
That's a question I think is asked many times of people. Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you go away? To me, that's a hard question to answer because they didn't believe it. And yes, they could have possibly, but maybe not. So I don't know. But I know that a lot of people ask that question. Why didn't they do this? And why didn't they do that? And I never walked in their shoes. So I don't know what I would have done. So.
Sure.
Anybody have an answer for that? I don't, do you?
And the other question here is, Judy's parents left Hungary during the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 and went to Montreal. At the same time, Judy's aunt Eva stayed in Budapest.
Yeah.
Question is, did your
Parents, would they have left anyway, or would they?
Aunt Eva ever consider leaving?
Yeah, my aunt never
She
left.
said in Budapest she never considered leaving Hungary.
But my parents learned their lesson. And one of the biggest events after that, the Hungarian Revolution, was when in Quebec, the Canadian Army came into Quebec to put down some uprising. And my mother and father were so nervous and so scared that here we go again, another attack, another revolution. And I couldn't understand why they were so upset. Now I do.
Judy, was there a movement of freedom fighters, Jewish freedom fighters, or Hungarian soldiers that that are called partisans, who fought on behalf of the populations that were being enslaved and killed?
Do you know any?
I don't know if there were.
I don't know. I know I've heard a lot of stories, read books on that, but I personally don't know any. Yeah, sorry. So there's a question.
There's a question, was the family's faith affected and how?
Well, I think my mother's fate was affected because she believed so strongly that God would help her, protect her, and she was disappointed. I don't believe that, but she's got every right to feel that. I didn't go through the Holocaust, but I don't feel that God causes bad things. It's people who made bad choices, according to my thinking. But my mom had her very strong beliefs. Yeah.
I was wondering, Judy, if you approve of the way that the public schools in America handle the Holocaust.
Okay, so I taught in Montreal, but I've never heard them teach about the Holocaust. I taught in Indiana. We never taught the Holocaust. Then when I taught in the Jewish day school, there we did. But now we speak on behalf of the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, and we take the Holocaust to the schools. I don't bring this version of the Holocaust. I just bring more gentle, and I don't have my mother and father speaking on there, but I tell them the story. And I found them to be very attentive and caring. Yeah, thank you for asking.
So how did you grow up with these stories, Judy? How did you grow up with these stories and turn out to be such a generous person?
Well, I think because I grew up with these stories, I had to become a nurturer. I had to help my parents. I had to look after my parents. I had to show them love. And I think it's only later that I realized that there's me and that I had feelings too. But at that time, it was just giving to my parents. And basically, that's what.
A commercial break, John. I'd like to thank both Judy and Mike, and thank
We have one
Men's
more
Club.
question first,
This
John.
is another way that we are trying to keep the temple together by having these type of programs along with everything else that we're doing. So thank you, John, and you can continue, whomever.
Okay, very good. We thank you. We have another question on the chat. How come Judy's parents came to Montreal where it's so cold instead of coming to the warmer climate in the US? They actually had two homes. They had a year-round home in Montreal, and they had a winter home in Florida where they spent about 5 months each year. But it's so cold in Montreal, as you know, in the winter, the temperatures go all the way down to Celsius.
So Judy, question. So you still have cousins living in Hungary, in Budapest?
Yeah, I still have my cousin Bandi and my cousin Vera.
Given the family history and given the current Hungarian government and the xenophobia and the anti-Semitism, what are their feelings about currently living in Hungary? Because there's certain implications.
Certainly. And my cousin Vera, who's at the hospital, is more aware of it. My cousin Bandi chooses not to follow the Jewish faith, although his mother, of course, was my mother's sister in the war. But when we were in Hungary, the synagogues had guards outside, and there are guards around the big Budapest synagogue as well. So things are not good there. And they can't leave. They didn't choose to leave all this time. And I don't think they'll leave now. But they're aware of it. They're aware of it. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to just do one more round. Any additional questions?
I had one in the chat too about the work command. I was curious. Did you mention that was Hungarian? And if so, why were they digging trenches for the Russians?
Well, Hungarian men were not allowed to serve in the Hungarian Jewish men were not allowed to serve in the Hungarian army. And so they were sent to work rather than serve the army. And that's how they ended up digging trenches, because they couldn't serve in the army. And then they became prisoners of war for the Russians and so on. So that was their way of torturing Jewish men versus the other people.
Hungary was a puppet state of the Nazis during World War II, but they had their own army.
Yeah. Yeah. But the Jews were not allowed to serve. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but well, thank
Judy,
you.
Michael, thank you so much for tonight's presentation. It was well done.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.